The other day, Ellen and I were out taking a walk together, and as we were walking, she asked me one of her big picture questions. This happens sometimes. It's usually along the lines of, so, how can we achieve world peace? This time it was, what do you want most out of life? And while I gathered my thoughts about that, she said, I'll tell you what I want most: to stay healthy, to be well, because everything else flows from that. I thought that was very wise, and it made me think not long after when I read our scripture passage for today about how interesting and mysterious it is that so often what's on our minds shows up in what we read in the Bible. Because here's a story about Jesus healing a man who did not have his health, who was not well, who'd been chronically ill for 38 years. And that was in a time and place where 38 years might be around your average life expectancy. So this gentleman, it's safe to assume, had been sick most of his life. He'd been sick so long, he probably could not remember what being well even felt like. Now, we don't know his specific ailment, but he was among several other people who could not walk or who were paralyzed or who could not see and who survived by begging. And these poor folks were together at a pool. You can picture a large outdoor public bath with porticos all around the edges, and it was located right by one of the main entrances to the city of Jerusalem, a place where you could wash your feet after a long day's travel. Very high traffic area. We can imagine hundreds or even maybe 1,000 people walking past that spot every hour, especially on a date when people were streaming into the city to participate in a religious festival as they were on that occasion. It was a holiday weekend like this one, and it's why Jesus was there in Jerusalem in the first place. So this pool would have been a great place to be located if you had a debility, and in order to survive, you depended on the kindness and charity of strangers. Now, one of the challenges you and I face when we hear a story like this, where Jesus provides healing for someone, is that we can picture him walking around healing people all the time, just moving through crowds with his arms outstretched, curing one ailment or another with the touch of his hands. But if we examine these healing stories carefully, in almost every case, Jesus first has a conversation with the person who is sick. And that's true here. Jesus notices this man. He stops and he asks him, do you want to be made well? So the obvious implication is this man had a choice. You might even suspect he'd reply sarcastically, what do you think, Jesus? Of course I want to be made well. But that's not what the man says. He tells Jesus that he doesn't have anyone to help him get into the water when it's the right time, when the water is being stirred up. What does that mean? Well, this pool was called Bethsaida, and over time that name morphed into the word we're familiar with, Bethesda. And the pool was fed by an underground spring. If you visit Jerusalem even today, you can see exactly where this spring and this pool was located. It's pretty neat. But when this spring overflowed, it would bubble up from beneath, causing a disturbance in the waters above and at the surface. And it might have happened a few times a day, we don't know. But in those days, a popular legend said that the rippling of the waters was caused by the fluttering of angels' wings. That the first person to enter into those bubbling waters would be cured of whatever ailed them. Now, today, we still name things Bethesda in honor of that pool. Places of healing and hope like hospitals. In Central Park in New York City, the Bethesda Fountain, anyone ever been there? Oh, it's gorgeous. Adorned with a big, beautiful statue of an angel, the Angel of the Waters, she's called. That commemorates the opening of the first aqueduct that brought fresh water into New York City, all the way from Westchester County back in 1842. Fresh, clean water, healing water, just like the waters of Bethesda. Problem is, healing waters are no good unless you can reach them, and this man could not. He told Jesus that every time the water stirred and started to bubble, someone else would step right over him and get in first. So Jesus had his answer. Why else would the man be right there by the edge of the pool if he did not want to be healed? Of course he wanted to be healed. Philip McClarty is a Presbyterian minister, and he wrote something really interesting about this man. Philip said that when you think about it, 38 years, that's a long time to wait for a miracle, especially when the conditions were so obviously impossible to meet. From this man's own admission, he had no hope of ever reaching the water before the others could. So you have to wonder why he kept coming back day after day, year after year. Given the circumstances, he had no reasonable chance of ever being made well. So maybe the question Jesus actually asked him was more like, do you truly want to be healed? Because if you really do, you're not going about this in the right way. Unless something gives, it's just not going to happen. But of course, something did give. Jesus did not lift the man into the water in front of everyone else. He told him just to get up, to take his mat and walk. And the man was made well. No bubbling water required. The man just needed to be told that he could walk. Okay, there are so many ways to unpack what this story means. I've heard some preachers talk about this sick man as if he was some kind of a lazy, grumpy person who, after years of coming to the pool, well, he just got used to it. It was his way of life. He was a professional sick person. Maybe after 38 years, he couldn't imagine what his life would even be like if he was healed. Change can be a scary thing. And until Jesus came along and told him to get up and walk and actually made that possible, it makes sense that he might have assumed, the sick man might have assumed, that being sick was just his lot in life. I've heard more or less the same kind of thing when people have pointed out to me someone standing at an intersection with a sign asking for money. I've heard several times indignation directed at people who do that, as if those folks chose begging at an intersection as a career. I've known lots of homeless people, and personally, I do not believe that interpretation about what motivates them is accurate. First of all, we're assuming that we have any clue about what it's like to not know what we're going to eat today. So to me, criticizing homeless people sounds a lot like blaming the victim and presuming that we can ever understand anyone's inner motivation or believe it is our job to judge anyone, especially without knowing them or having walked a mile in their shoes. That's rather absurd for us to ever have any negative opinions about people who are unhoused or poor. Our job as it relates to them is simply to help them, not to judge them, to see them through God's loving eyes, not through eyes that want to find fault as we so often do with things that make us uncomfortable. And since Jesus was looking at that man through eyes that mirrored how God sees us, his question, do you want to be made well? That does not sound judgmental to me at all. It just sounds inquisitive, even caring. It sounds to me a lot like the question that Ellen asked me when we were taking that walk that day. What do you want most out of life? I agreed with her that I want to be healthy and well for sure. I don't want to ever take that for granted. We've all had too many friends and loved ones get very sick, perhaps debilitated, and pass away. To ever take the gift of a healthy life for granted. But my secret sin, if you want to call it that, is that in the daily routine of life, I do sometimes take that for granted. And when I lay my head down at night, I assume I'm going to wake up tomorrow and it won't be remarkably different from today or yesterday or the day before. Occasions do crop up, and I have days that I'm anticipating will be more fun or productive or restful than others. I have deadlines to meet, projects to plan for, things I'd like to accomplish. But I also need to be asked, I need to be reminded now and then, what do I really want most out of life? And the inevitable follow-up to that question, whether it's spoken out loud or not, is if it's really what I want most and what I most need, then what am I actually doing about that? That question, and the question Jesus asked that man by the pool that day, is really the same question. What are you prioritizing? What's most important to you? Are you stuck? Do you have to be stuck? What do you need to do to be made well, to be made whole? Is there someone in my life I'm in conflict with, a family member or a friend? If so, what should I be doing about that to make it whole again? Am I just complaining about it, or am I trying to reconcile it? If I'm unhappy about anything, really, can I change that way of being? Can I fix things in the world that seem to be broken? Or is it less risky just to leave things as they are? Lots of broken things these days. Now, we don't always have a choice in the matter about being made well. It's no one's fault to have a debilitating illness. But if we do have a choice at all, what choice are we making? Are we answering that big picture question, or are we avoiding it just one day at a time? Because in the big picture of being well, being whole, that compels us to take some kind of action that leads to change, even if it's change internally, change of mind, change of heart. I once knew a man, he was a member of a church I served, where he had been estranged from his adult son for decades. The reason was his son had come home from college one weekend years before to tell his parents that he was gay. So the father, just could not handle that news, and he told his son to leave immediately. He wanted nothing more to do with him. And the father was, very religious, very conservative, traditional in his theological views. For him, being gay was a choice, and it was a sin in his mind. Whenever the son attempted to reach out, the father rebuffed him. And the distance between them grew so great they simply had no contact with each other. Now, the son had kept in touch with his mother over the years, but the father had stood his ground until the man's wife became ill and she passed away. And at her funeral, the son showed up. And at the sight of his son, at first the father did not know what to do, but he told me he had a revelation. The revelation was that he had wasted years, decades of failing to see what matters most. He realized that he'd stuck to principles that really were not principles at all, but small-minded ideas that kept him shackled day after day, year after year. He couldn't admit it to himself, but he was just too afraid of what would happen to his cherished beliefs if he were to accept his son for who he was. But the good news, he finally did. He took that risk and he reclaimed that relation to his son that he'd thrown away and almost forever. And here's the lesson. He told me what that felt like. He said that it was as if he had finally been healed, made whole. There's a Greek word that's used again and again in different ways in the New Testament, including this story about the man at the pool of Bethesda. It's translated into English as the phrase made well, as in, do you want to be made well? This Greek word is sozo. Sozo. It's also translated into English whenever you see the word saved or salvation in the Bible. So the big picture question for all of us is, what do we most want? What do we most need? What do we want and need to be made well and to be made whole, to be saved? Perhaps from ourselves, from our biases, from our preconceived notions, our insistence on always being right? Are we willing to discover what salvation really means and what matters most? And beyond each of us individually, how about all of us collectively? In the past several months, I feel like I've been stymied or confused or overwhelmed about how to respond and how to suggest how we might best respond as members of a church to things that are happening on a national scale. Now, before I say anything else, I want everyone to hear me very clearly. I understand that what I may believe personally, my social views, my political views, are not things that are okay to bring up in church, usually. Because I respect that our members have a range of opinions and beliefs about such things. So I tread very carefully. And I get that I'm in a privileged position, that I have this pulpit and that what I say can sound as if I'm setting the policy for all of us. I'm not. We are, let's remember, a congregational church. We are not a church where the minister has the last word, and I'm grateful for that. And that's why it's important for me to say and for you to hear that if you disagree with me, that is okay. If you don't vote the way that I do, that's fine. I really don't care who you vote for. I truly don't. We can disagree on that stuff, and I will still love you and be your pastor. I will still hear you and respect you and pray with you and for you. Now, with that said, what I'm talking about today is important, I think, for who we are as people who claim to follow the basic teachings and ethos of Jesus of Nazareth. Love your neighbor as yourself, do to others as you want done to you. Those basics, if we try to define who's my neighbor, it becomes very clear to me that our neighbor is everyone, period, full stop, no exceptions, individually and collectively. Everyone is my neighbor. And as we say every Sunday, no matter who you are, you're welcome here. We make no exceptions to that I'm aware of. And you can call me an old-fashioned liberal if you want, but I take that to mean that I have, along with everyone else, an obligation. I have a social covenant, a corporate responsibility to care about, to care for people whom I may never meet, as well as for those in need in my immediate community, whom I might very well meet. I believe the society and the world in which I live depends on me and others, people of goodwill, to care about and care for unhoused people and people who are disadvantaged, for people who are poor and for children born into bad situations, for people who are sick, for people who are just different in ways that not everyone accepts, but who deserve to be treated with compassion and dignity. And people from other places, from other countries who come to this prosperous democracy to get an education and to find work, to avoid political violence and to help their family, and to simply have a chance at a better life. I believe it's my calling as a human being to leave the world better and more sane and cleaner and healthier and just and safer than it was before I ever came along. I think that's what Jesus would have me do. I think Jesus would ask me, do you want to be made well, David? And while you're at it, do you want to help the world to be made well? Your community, your society, your nation? Because you cannot separate who you are and how you're doing from your neighbor and how they are doing. And that's how you love them as yourself. But today and in the past few months, here's what I see. The cutting of federal anti-poverty programs, where millions of low-income Americans are in danger of losing access to food stamps, and they're going to see reductions in their monthly benefits. That's not helping anyone made well. I see American citizens who have been seized off the street and locked up on the suspicion that they are undocumented migrants. I see people being sent away illegally without due process. That's not helping anyone. I see visas being revoked for international college students to punish colleges for allowing or encouraging supposed anti-Semitism. See it. I see legislation to slash Medicaid, where it's estimated that 7 million Americans would become uninsured. Is having more uninsured people a helpful thing? If so, please explain that to me. All of those news items that I might sometime myself affect me personally do in fact affect me, and they affect all of us, because I believe those are issues of moral responsibility that we all bear for the health, the wellness, the wholeness of our neighbor. And my problem, and maybe your own, has been to witness this cascade of policies. It's fatiguing, is it not? And it feels as if some new absurdity on a daily basis is coming down. And that appears to me to fly in the face of human decency and what we're called to do as people of faith. And sadly, I'm not entirely sure how to respond. I want to respond. I feel compelled to respond. I feel compelled to address this collective social illness, this unwellness, by getting up and walking. By walking in the direction all of us, our neighbors, can be well. But how best to do that? If you feel that way too, let's talk about how. Let's discuss how we together can do something in this corner of the world that can be a helpful response. Not just a symbol of resistance, not just a protest, although protests have their place, but a tangible, meaningful way to make a positive difference, even if it's relatively modest, even if it's local. Let's get up, pick up our mats, let's stand up, and let's embrace the healing that we all need right now.